Welcome to New Genesis Novel, where the greatest minds are modernized for today. Hello, I am Gustave Flaubert, the author of Masterpiece. I suppose it is fitting to begin at the beginning, in the damp and shadowed corridors of Rouen, where I was born in December of 1821. My childhood was not one of sunlit meadows or innocent frolics, but rather one steeped in the profound and inescapable realities of human mortality. My father, Achille Cléophas Flaubert, was the chief surgeon at the Hôtel-Dieu, the great hospital of Rouen, and our family residence was attached directly to this theatre of suffering. I grew up with the scent of carbolic acid and decay lingering in the air, a constant reminder of the fragile vessel that is the human body. While other boys played with wooden soldiers, my sister Caroline and I would peer through the lattice of the garden fence to watch the orderlies carrying corpses to the dissection rooms. This proximity to death and disease stripped away any illusions I might have harboured about the romance of human existence. It instilled in me a clinical eye, a surgeon's detachment that I would later apply not to flesh and bone, but to the sentences and paragraphs of my prose. I was a melancholic child, prone to long hours of solitary reflection, entirely out of step with the practical, bourgeois ambitions of my family. My older brother, also named Achille, was the golden child, destined to follow in my father's illustrious footsteps and wield the scalpel. I, on the other hand, was considered somewhat slow, a dreamer lost in the pages of Don Quixote, a book that poisoned my mind with the intoxicating venom of literature. I despised the provincial bourgeoisie of Rouen, their petty concerns, their obsession with money, and their utter lack of aesthetic appreciation. To escape this stifling environment, I created my own worlds. By the time I was 9, I was already writing plays, staging them on the family billiard table with my friends, casting myself in the roles of tragic heroes and tyrannical kings. School was a torment, a prison of rigid discipline and uninspired instruction that only deepened my contempt for authority and conventional wisdom. I found solace only in my reading and in the passionate, often turbulent friendships I formed, particularly with Alfred Le Poitevin, who shared my disdain for the mundane world and my fervent devotion to art. Together, we would wander the countryside, reciting poetry to the wind, dreaming of a life dedicated entirely to the pursuit of beauty. My mother Justine, a woman of nervous disposition and fierce maternal devotion, worried endlessly about my future, unable to comprehend the fire that burned within me. She wished for me to study law, to secure a respectable position in society, a prospect that filled me with absolute dread. I did attempt to fulfill her wishes, dutifully travelling to Paris to study the law, but my spirit rebelled against the dry, lifeless texts. It was during this period that I suffered my first nervous collapse, a physical manifestation of my soul's rejection of a life unsuited to my nature. This illness, terrifying as it was, became my salvation, forcing my family to accept that I was unfit for any profession other than that of a writer. Thus, the foundation of my existence was laid in those early years in Rouen, a foundation built upon the stark observation of reality, a profound hatred for bourgeois mediocrity, and an unwavering, almost religious commitment to the written word. You ask me of my struggles and rejections, as if they were mere episodes in a life, but I tell you that my entire existence has been nothing but a continuous, agonizing wrestling match with the written word and the unbearable mediocrity of the world around me. If you wish to speak of rejection, we must begin with the most devastating blow of my youth, a wound inflicted not by enemies but by my most intimate friends. Picture the scene at Croisset in the autumn of 1849. I had spent years pouring my very soul, all my lyrical madness and romantic fever, into the manuscript of The Temptation of St. Anthony. I believed it to be my masterpiece. For 4 days, 8 hours a day, I read it aloud, to Louis Bouillet and Maxime Ducamp. I was trembling with exhaustion and pride, waiting for their tears, their applause. And what was their verdict when I finally fell silent? They told me to throw it into the fire and never speak of it again. They said it was overgrown, undisciplined, a cancer of words. The shock of that moment nearly killed me. It was an absolute rejection of my deepest artistic self. They commanded me to abandon my grand visions and write something ordinary, something vulgar, to cure me of my romanticism. And so, out of those bitter ashes of rejection, I was forced to look at the wretched bourgeois life I so despised, which led me to the creation of Madame Bovary. But do not think for a moment that the writing of Madame Bovary was a triumph. It was an excruciating martyrdom. That was my true struggle, the daily, hourly torture of style. I would sit at my desk in the country, staring at a blank page, until my eyes bled, hunting for the exact word, the one perfect word, which always seemed to evade me. I would write a sentence, cross it out, rewrite it, and then pace up and down my study, shouting the words into the night air to test their rhythm against the silence. Sometimes a whole week would pass, and I would have produced only a single paragraph. My brain felt as though it were being crushed in a vice. I was physically ill from the effort of trying to make language do things it had never done before, trying to render the pathetic reality of provincial life with the objective perfection of a marble statue. And what was my reward for this bloodletting? When the novel was finally published, I was dragged before the criminal courts of Paris like a common thief. The state prosecutor accused me of outraging public morals and religion. That was the ultimate rejection by society, the hideous face of the bourgeoisie rising up to crush art because it dared to hold a mirror to their own hypocrisy. They could not understand that I had written a profoundly moral book precisely by refusing to moralize. I was acquitted, yes, but the trial left me permanently disgusted with humanity. I realized then that to be an artist is to be an eternal exile. The public does not want truth or beauty, they want comfortable lies. My entire life has been a rejection of their world, and their world has continually tried to reject me. I have sacrificed my health, my youth, and any chance at ordinary human happiness for the sake of literature. I have lived like a monk and suffered like a damned soul, all for the architecture of a sentence. So do not speak to me of minor setbacks. My struggle is the cross I bear for the religion of art, and I will carry it to my grave, screaming every word into the void. You ask me to dissect the soul of my Emma, to tear apart the flesh of Madame Bovary, and lay bare the veins and sinews of my own creation, a task I approach with both the exhaustion of a surgeon and the melancholy of a lover. They called it a scandal, a vulgar tale of provincial adultery, but they are fools who see only the surface of the canvas and never the brushstrokes of despair beneath. Emma is not merely a woman, she is a disease, the very malady of the human soul that I call Bovarism, the tragic and eternal gulf between the mediocrity of reality and the soaring, impossible altitudes of our desires. When I wrote her, I was writing the tragedy of imagination. Consider the books she devoured in the convent, those cheap romantic novels filled with ruined castles, swooning maidens and brave knights. These are not mere props, but the poison itself, the arsenic of the mind that she ingests long before she ever swallows the physical powder at the end. Her reading is a metaphor for the consumption of false ideals, a spiritual indigestion that renders the ordinary world unbearable. Look closely at the agricultural fair, the comices agricoles, which cost me months of agonizing over every single syllable. There I wove a counterpoint of the grotesque and the romantic. While Rodolphe whispers his practiced, deceitful seductions into Emma's ear, the officials below are shouting out awards for manure and pigs. This is no accident. It is the absolute equation of bourgeois romantic love with the trading of livestock, the reduction of human passion to the level of mud and commerce. Love, in the hands of the mediocre, is just another commodity. And what of poor, dull Charles? His botched operation on the clubfoot of Hippolyte is the ultimate metaphor for the ineptitude of the bourgeoisie. He attempts to cure a harmless deformity out of sheer vanity, spurred on by the pompous pharmacist Homais, and ends up causing gangrene and amputation. It is the perfect symbol of how the middle class, armed with half-knowledge and arrogant ambition, destroys whatever it tries to improve. Then there is the blind beggar who haunts the roads of Yonville, the hideous spectre with his bleeding, festering eyes who sings a cheerful song about a young girl dreaming of love. He is the physical manifestation of Emma's internal corruption, the rotting reality that waits at the end of all her beautiful illusions. When she hears his voice on her deathbed, it is the final mockery of her romantic dreams, the brutal truth of the flesh triumphing over the lies of the spirit. Even her frantic carriage ride through the streets of Rouen with Léon, a scene that scandalized the censors, is a metaphor for the claustrophobic, aimless desperation of her desires. The carriage goes everywhere and nowhere, a sealed box of frantic motion that cannot escape the boundaries of the city, just as Emma cannot escape the boundaries of her own banal existence. She seeks transcendence in the flesh of ordinary men, a fatal miscalculation. In the end, the arsenic she eats is merely the physical realization of the bitterness she has tasted her entire life. She sought the sweet intoxication of romance, but reality is a dry black powder that burns the throat and leaves the taste of ink on the tongue. I poured my own blood into her veins, my own hatred of human stupidity into the cobblestones of Yonville, and when I said Madame Bovary si et moi, I meant that we are all choking on the dust of our own impossible dreams. You ask me to lay bare my ultimate philosophy on the wretched trinity of human nature, love and death, as if such vast and bleeding subjects could be neatly pinned to a board, like dead butterflies. I have spent my entire life bleeding over my desk at Croisset, hunting for the exact word to capture the precise agony and absurdity of our existence, and I tell you now that to look closely at humanity is to invite a profound and incurable nausea. Human nature is fundamentally an exercise in profound mediocrity and boundless stupidity. We are creatures cursed with just enough imagination to construct grand, impossible ideals, yet burdened with a grotesque, heavy flesh that drags us continually back into the mud. Look around you, and what do you see but an endless parade of bourgeois vanity, petty ambitions, and a desperate clinging to platitudes? We are all of us infected with the disease of wanting to be something we are not, suffering from that fatal condition I explored through my poor Emma, an eternal yearning for a life that exists only in cheap romances and feverish daydreams. We build monuments to our own self-importance while ignoring the absolute insignificance of our daily routines. And what is love? That great idol before which all of humanity prostrates itself, but the most cruel and elaborate of our self-deceptions. Love is nothing more than a temporary collision of two misunderstandings, a momentary fever of the blood that we elevate to the status of the divine, because we are terrified of our own isolation. We dress our base animal instincts in the velvet garments of poetry, convincing ourselves that our fleeting passions are eternal. But the velvet inevitably frays, the poetry turns to prose, and the lover who once seemed a god descends into a creature of irritating habits and suffocating demands. Love promises the infinite, but delivers only the suffocating confines of the parlour room, leaving us stranded in a desert of boredom and regret, realising too late that the object of our affection was merely a blank screen upon which we projected our own desperate fantasies. We chase the phantom of perfect union until we are exhausted, only to find that the soul remains an impenetrable fortress, forever alone, which brings us inevitably to death, the only genuine certainty in this farcical play, the grand and silent conclusion to our frantic, pointless scurrying. Death is the ultimate artist, the great editor who strips away all the superfluous nonsense of our lives and leaves only the stark, unadorned truth of our nothingness. I do not fear death, for I have always felt like a ghost walking among the living, an observer who belongs more to the past and to the realm of ink than to the breathing world. Death is the final cure for the disease of living, the absolute silence that follows the unbearable noise of human folly. It is the great leveller that turns the king and the peasant, the romantic and the cynic, into the same indifferent dust. In the face of such a bleak reality, what salvation is there, you might ask? There is only one, and it is the agonizing, solitary religion of art. Life is a hideous thing, and the only way to endure it is to avoid it by retreating into the sanctuary of the written word. We must stand above the human comedy, observing it with the cold, detached eye of a surgeon, feeling everything yet betraying nothing, striving only to capture the tragic beauty of our own decay. We must be like God in the universe, present everywhere and visible nowhere, transforming the ugly, pathetic truth of human nature, the bitter illusion of love, and the terrifying shadow of death into something permanent, something that transcends the rot of our physical existence. That is the only truth I know, the only philosophy worth bleeding for, a relentless pursuit of beauty in a world that is fundamentally devoid of it. I hear you calling to me across the century, dragging me from the quiet dust of Croisset into the blinding noise of your era. You ask me to speak, as if the dead have learned some new secret that the living do not possess. But I tell you now, as I told my friends in my own time, there is nothing new under the sun, only new costumes for the same eternal, human tragicomedy. I spent my life chained to my desk, agonizing over a single sentence, until my head throbbed and my eyes wept, bleeding onto the page to capture the exact word, the only word that could contain the truth of a moment. I despised the bourgeoisie of my day, those complacent souls who worshipped utility and comfort, who believed that progress was measured by the speed of a train or the accumulation of coins. I look at your world now, and I see that my bourgeoisie have conquered the earth. You have built miraculous machines that send your thoughts across the globe in a fraction of a second. Yet what do you say to one another? You broadcast your vanity, your petty grievances, and your hollow desires. You are drowning in a torrent of words, but you have forgotten how to read, how to taste the rhythm of a syllable, how to surrender to the terrifying beauty of a perfectly constructed phrase. You believe that because you move faster, you are going somewhere. You believe that because you have more information, you have more wisdom. It is a profound and tragic illusion. The human heart remains the same dark, desperate organ it was when Emma Bovary swallowed the arsenic. The same romantic illusions, the same crushing disappointments, the same yawning abyss of boredom await you all. Art is the only salvation, the only true religion left to us in a universe entirely indifferent to our suffering. I sacrificed everything for it. I gave up love, family, and peace of mind to wrestle with the angel of syntax, to carve statues of ivory and gold out of the mud of human existence. I did not write to entertain, nor did I write to teach a moral lesson. I wrote to make the invisible visible, to capture the brutal, magnificent reality of life without flinching. I see your generation paralysed by anxiety, constantly seeking validation from a faceless multitude, terrified of silence, terrified of being alone with your own thoughts. You treat life as a performance, a cheap spectacle to be consumed and forgotten by tomorrow. But greatness requires solitude. Greatness requires the willingness to be misunderstood, to endure the agonizing labor of creation without the promise of a reward. And so, I leave you with this final, urgent plea, you who are inheriting a world that is spinning out of control. Do not surrender to the deafening roar of the crowd. Reject the cheap, the fast, and the easily consumed. Cultivate a profound disdain for the superficial. Retreat into the sanctuary of your own mind and demand perfection from yourselves, even if it tears you apart. Find your own exact word, your own singular truth, and hold on to it with the grip of a drowning man. Worship beauty in its purest form, for it is the only thing that will survive the ashes of your civilization. Read deeply, feel violently, and refuse to be a mere echo of your times. Be the stone that breaks the current. Be the silent observer who sees through the masks. And above all, never compromise the sacred integrity of your own soul for the applause of a world that does not know how to listen.